Now, some definitions. The word Islam means submission to the will of Allah. A Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of Allah. And Islam believes there will be world peace when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. So Islam is a religion of peace. It's just their definition of the word peace is different than our definition. Our definition of peace is different groups getting along. Their definition of world peace is world Islam. So when they say it's a religion of peace, yeah, that's their goal, is to make everyone submit to Allah, everyone be Islam, right? Abraham Lincoln said, we all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. We all want peace, but when we say it, it's not the same as when they say it. So in Islam, the world's divided in two, the half that has submitted to Allah and the half that's in the process of submitting to Allah. So they see the world as Muslim and going to be Muslim. The half that's submitted is the house of Islam. The half that's in the process, the Dar al-Harb, is the house of war. The non-Muslim world is supposed to be at war because it's in the process of submitting. What about moderate Muslims? Moderate Muslims believe the world will submit to Allah later. Maybe at the end of the world, maybe in the distant future. Maybe it's even figurative. And since it's so far off, they really don't think about it that often. They just want to live their lives, have their family, fine. That type of Muslim has no problem living in a free democratic society and having you as a kafir infidel as a neighbor. The fundamental Muslim, though, they think the world is supposed to submit to Allah now. And they're really excited and they want to help make it happen. Now, the dilemma we face in the West is the more we show ourselves nice and tolerant and respectful and accommodating and really careful not to offend them, the moderate Muslim begins to rethink and says, this has never happened before, that the biggest infidel country is letting us come in as immigrants and paying us $2,500 a month and giving us free Section 8 housing and free food, free clothes, free education, free everything. And now they're really careful not to offend. This has never happened. Maybe the world is, in fact, submitting to Allah now rather than later. Until they gravitate from the future peaceful moderate camp into the fundamental now camp, which is the violent camp. So in Islam, they have a concept. When your enemy shows weakness, that is Allah giving them to you. So my daughter had a friend who led school field trips to the zoo, and they would go in front of the wolf cage and would have a kid walk in front of the wolf cage, real bold and strong. The wolves didn't even bother looking at him. Had the same kid walk in front of the cage acting like he's injured. And all of a sudden the wolves look at him. And then they're starting to, and then they were trying to walk back and forth, figure out how they can get across the ditch to get him. And weakness invites aggression, right? So if a lion's chasing a zebra and the zebra trips, does the lion slow down or does it pounce? Our foreign policy has been like a football game where the other team's playing tough, so we get in the huddle, we tell ourselves, tell you what, let's let them get a first down, they'll get it out of their system, and then they'll let us get a first down. That doesn't work, so we get in the huddle, we say, tell you what, let's let them score, then certainly they'll be nice and let us score. That doesn't work. We keep giving them touchdown after touchdown. We can't understand the more yardage we give up, instead of them giving us a turn, they're getting more excited and they're packing out the stadium and they're on their feet cheering, right? So another word to define is innocent, right? So when Muslims kill people in Paris, our president gave a speech and says, well, those killers do not represent true Islam because Islam says it's wrong to kill the innocent. Well, innocent is a follower of the way of Allah. So if you are not a follower of the way of Allah, if you reject Allah, you're guilty. And it says, Allah loveth not those who reject the faith. Be ruthless to the infidel, means unbeliever. Make war on the infidel. Fight those who believe not in Allah. Kill the disbeliever wherever you find them. So when they say it's wrong to kill the innocent, it's code for it's wrong to kill faithful Muslims. Now, in all due respect, the ones that are doing the killing, they view the non-violent Muslims as having left the way of Allah, and they're just as happy to kill a non-violent Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. Spain. It took 700 years to drive the Muslims out of Spain. And here's Charlton Heston playing El Cid, Rodrigo Diaz. I met Charlton Heston. He endorsed me when I ran for Congress years ago. He was the head of the NRA. And so El Cid is charging. And they're fighting the Muslims out of this area of Spain, but they need one more charge to win, but he's wounded. And they're looking at him and say, you're bleeding to death. You're not going to survive. And he's like, well, I'm going to die anyway. Put me back on the horse, tie me on really tight with a board up my back. They open the barn doors and they slap the horse and he goes off riding. And his men go, there goes El Cid. They hurry up, jump on their horses and they go off riding. And they win the battle. After the victory, they're celebrating. They go, where's El Cid? They see him over there all by himself, sort of drooped over. It's one of those romantic chick flicks, Should we watch The Notebook or El Cid? And Anyway, so they're driving the Muslims out, courageous battles. While they were in Spain, they enslaved over 1 million people. And there were whole Catholic orders in Europe through the Middle Ages called the Trinitarians. And the head of the order was called the ransomer, and they would collect alms and donations and go to North Africa to ransom your friend back who was captured from a Greek island or an Italian coast. And in 846 AD, 11,000 Muslims invaded Rome, Italy. And they trashed the Basilica of St. Peter's, and they trashed the graves of St. Peter and St. Paul. Right? So St. Peter was crucified upside down at the Circus Maximus, and then after they became Christian, they built a big church there called the Basilica of St. Peter's, and then as the centuries went on, the thing was tipping over like 4 feet from top to bottom. But it was called the Basilica, and so this is when the Muslims attacked, and they trashed it. After the attack is when Pope Leo decided to build the wall around the Vatican, because it was actually outside of the city of Rome. And so you have the Pope building a wall to keep the Muslim invaders out. And so then they had pirates at sea, and they raided the coast of Italy. There was a whole coast of Italy where there was not a woman of childbearing age for generations, because they would come up sort of like Boko Haram, round up the women, take them to North Africa, sell them into slavery. And they invaded England. And in 1625, Muslim pirates carried away over 1,000 from England. In 1630, they attacked Ireland, the stolen village of Baltimore, Ireland. Muslims came up and attacked and carried them away to Morocco. And then they attacked in Reykjavik, Iceland, carried away thousands. And then they enslaved an estimated 180 million Africans. They would castrate the men, make them eunuchs, sell the women into the sex trafficking. They had slavery in Africa for 8 centuries before America was ever discovered. Muhammad was a white Arab. There are hadiths that talk about when he'd pray and lift his arms, they would see the whiteness of his armpits. Another hadith story that a guy was going on his donkey to early morning prayer, rubs up against the prophet's donkey, and he says, I saw the whiteness of the prophet's thigh. Another hadith, some visitors wanted to meet Muhammad, and they said he is the white man reclining on the couch. And Muhammad owned African slaves. So in Arabic, they have one word for African and slave. It's the same word, abd, A-B-D. Like Abdullah means slave of Allah, so abd means slave. So every black person, they call him slave. And so they would attack these villages and kill about 1/3 in the conquest. And then the elderly and young would not survive the forced marches to the Timbuktu and the Muslim slave markets. And it went on for 8 centuries before America was discovered. And then finally, Columbus discovers the New World, and the Spaniards come over, and there's 2 different kinds, right? You always have people motivated by greed and people motivated by the gospel. Right? So you always have the ones digging wells and having filtered water and having orphanages and medical clinics, right? And you always have the ones that are taking land from the Indians, selling people into slavery and voting for candidates they think will help their pocketbook, even though the candidate stands for immorality, right? So we still have these 2 threads today. And so you had the greedy ones had these plantations, and they enslaved Native Americans for about 50 years. And the same time Martin Luther's doing the Reformation, in America there's a Catholic priest named Bartolome de las Casas. He spends his whole life to convince the King of Spain to stop the enslavement of Native Americans. And he's finally successful, and they're all celebrating. And then someone says, well, where can we get more slaves? And someone said, Africa. That's when they began to go to the Muslim slave markets and buy Africans to bring over to America. So virtually every African brought to America was purchased at a Muslim slave market. And it went on through the 1800s. Here's David Livingstone, the Scottish missionary to the Congo, writes in his journal about stumbling on a path of Africans shackled together, being marched single file through the jungle to be sold into Muslim slavery. And if they walk too slow, they just stab them or shoot them. He writes in his journal about stumbling across this lady bleeding to death. And what happened? Oh, she was walking too slow, and so they shot her. He says you could tell where the trails were by looking for the vulture circling. He goes through a valley and he's witnessing to the different tribes, comes back a year later, ghost villages, because the Muslim Arab slave traders rounded them all up, took them away. Somebody gave David Livingstone a paddle boat, with a little steam engine to go up the rivers. He said it kept breaking because it would hit the dead bodies of the Africans. He writes in his journal, if there's anything in my life and ministry that can stop this monster that hangs over Africa of the Muslim Arab slave trade, my life will be worth it. And it still goes on today. There's actually more slavery today than at any other time in world history, and a whole lot of it is in Muslim countries, Niger, Mauritania, Sudan. And they call it forced marriages and sex trafficking and so forth. Anyway, so we just talked about Muslims coming across North Africa into Spain, but then they had the audacity to attack Constantinople. Constantinople was the capital of Europe. Anyway, They were turned back because the defenders had something called Greek fire. And this is where they took oil and sawdust, sprayed it out of these hot oil cannons like napalm. So like holding a match in front of a can of hairspray. You never tried that, right? Don't try that at home. So they sprayed this hot oil, and the Muslims were stopped. Well, all that was the first Arab Spring. And the people say, well, Bill, you just talked about Muslims killing people. Didn't Christians kill people too? What about the Crusades, huh? Let's talk about that. That's the second spring, the Turkish Spring. And before we get into that, there's one way of saying, well, you know, Muslims kill people, Christians kill people. Every religion has crazies that kill people. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, let's not compare the followers, let's compare the founders, right? So if your computer acts up, what do? You reload the software the way it was when you bought it. If it really acts up, you reformat the disk the way it was when you bought it. Well, if your religion acts up, what do? You go back to the way it was when it left the founder. So let's compare the founders of the two largest religions in the world. Christianity is the largest religion in the world, around 32, 33%. Islam is the second largest religion in the world, around 22, 23%. 16% unaffiliated, 15% Hindu, 7% Buddhist, down to 0.2% Jewish. So let's compare the founders of the two largest religions in the world. Jesus never killed anybody. Muhammad killed an estimated 3,000 people, including cutting off the heads of those 700 Jews. Jesus never led armies. Muhammad led armies. He fought in 66 battles and raids. Jesus never owned slaves. Muhammad got a fifth of the slaves taken in battle. Jesus never married. Muhammad had anywhere from 11 to 22 wives, slave wives, concubines, the youngest being 6-year-old Aisha. He had a dream 2 nights in a row of him marrying the daughter of this general Abu Bakr, and the general said, well, you're the prophet. Here she is. Jesus never tortured anyone. When Muhammad conquered Khaybar, the last Jewish settlement in Arabia, the chief refused to tell where the tribe's treasure was hidden, so Muhammad had him stretched out on the ground. They kindled a fire on his chest, and he still didn't tell, so Muhammad beheaded him. Jesus didn't lie. Remember, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Muhammad permitted lying. It's called taqiyya, sacred lying, holy deceit. You're obligated to lie to the infidel until you can get the advantage and behead them. And so there's a story of a chieftain was planning on attacking Muhammad, and he goes to his warriors, and he said, who will rid me of the chieftain? His one warrior said, I will if you permit me to lie. And so the warrior goes to the chieftain, and he says, I've left Muhammad. He's a heretic. I want to help you, but they're after me. And the chieftain says, okay, you can spend the night in my tent. You'll have my whole army surrounding you. You'll be safe. So in the middle of the night, the warrior tiptoes over and beheads the chieftain, takes his head, runs all the way to Muhammad, and says, oh, prophet, Allah's face is shown upon you. And Muhammad said, no, Allah's face is shown upon you. And Muhammad gives him his staff, says you can lean on this in the day of judgment. So Muhammad approved of lying until you can take advantage. Another story is there was a Muslim warrior who was captured, and he was forced to renounce Muhammad, and he escaped, came back to Muhammad. Muhammad forgave him, and he said, if they make you turn, turn, but don't turn in your heart. In other words, it's okay to deny Muhammad in a pinch to save your skin, as long as you don't fight against Islam. In other words, it's okay to say you're not a Muslim in order to get elected, but then everything you do once you're elected is to help advance Islam. Anyway, Jesus never forced anyone to follow him. Remember, he multiplied loaves and fishes, and had a group of people following him for the wrong reasons, and so he says something really difficult to understand. He says, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no part in me. And many disciples said, this is a difficult saying. Who can bear it? And they walked with him no more. He turns to Peter, says, you want to go too? Peter says, well, I don't understand what you said, but you're the only one with the words of eternal life, so I'm with you. Muhammad said, whoever changes his Islamic religion, kill him. So here's Jesus saying, Jesus almost intentionally saying stuff to get people to not follow him, who are following him for the wrong reasons. He's sort of intentionally shaking them away. Muhammad said, whoever changes his Islamic religion, kill him. So you're free to join, you just can't leave. Sort of like Hotel California. And matter of fact, this is a Muslim leader currently in Egypt. And he says if they had gotten rid of the apostasy punishment, that means killing people who leave Islam, Islam would not exist today. Islam would have ended since the death of the prophet. And so I was visiting with a Muslim who became a Christian. His name is Elijah Abraham. Of course, that's a changed name because he didn't want all his Muslim relatives to be killed when they found out his real name. But anyway, he started a ministry, livingoasis.org. He said if they removed the apostasy punishments, 90% of Muslims would leave overnight. What is that? If you are a Muslim and you leave, your own family will come after you. You could be free for a couple years, and then some distant cousin can show up at the door and kill you. I mean, it's like your entire life. You're always sort of looking over your shoulder. And Jesus never avenged insults. Muhammad said, There was a guy named Ibn Khattal, made up poems making fun of him, so Muhammad ordered him murdered. Jesus did not permit his disciples to rape anyone. Duh, Muhammad did. There's always hadiths on how to do it. None of the apostles were governors or generals. Every one of the caliphs was a governor and a general. Jesus taught God was our father. In Islam, it's blasphemy to call Allah your father. Jesus taught we're children of God. In Islam, it's blasphemy to call yourself a child of Allah, because Allah took no wife and has no son. Jesus taught we're made in the image of God. In Islam, Allah has no image. And Jesus taught to have a personal relationship with God. And in Islam, it's blasphemy to even want to have a personal relationship with Allah. And the first 3 centuries of Christianity, there are 10 major persecutions. Christians are thrown to the lions, and they never led an armed resistance. The first 3 centuries of Islam, they conquered from Arabia to Paris. I wanted to say one thing about this forced following. The God of the Bible is a God of love. And the more you love someone, the more you want that someone to love you back. Now, God does not need our love, but he wants it. So like parents don't have to have kids, but they sort of want to have kids, and they pour all the love into the kids. And what makes them happy is that the kid just says thank you, right? And shows the love back, even though the kid can never repay everything. And so the idea is that for our response to be a love response, it must be voluntary. It has to be an act of your free will and your conscience. And God's not interested in forcing us to submit or he chops our head off. He's interested in this mystical thing of you voluntarily loving him. And so, not so in Islam. They don't really care if you have a warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart. They want outward compliance. Does that make sense? It's an important difference. So there's 14 centuries of Muslim crusades, and they kill an estimated 240 million people. There's only 2 centuries of European crusades, maybe 1 million died. So all these red dots are all the battles of Muslim crusades, and that's the very few that the Europeans did. And so the Muslims are closing in on the Byzantine Empire. Matter of fact, the most popular Greek saint was St. Nicholas, lived during Roman times, gave to the poor, and when the Muslims would come into an area, they would destroy the graves of the Christian saints. You know how they got the bones of St. Mark out of Egypt? The Christians packed them under pork to ship them to Venice, Italy. And the grave of Jonah was recently destroyed. Well, the St. Nicholas, the most popular Greek saint, he lived during Roman times, gave to the poor, and the Greeks would leave presents for each other on the anniversary of his death. Just a Greek thing until the Muslims invaded, and they were going to trash his grave, so they moved his remains over to Italy. And the Pope, Urban II, is the one who dedicates the church. And it was the same Pope, Urban II, that goes to the Council of Clermont, and he begs these European leaders to send help. He says, Jesus said, leave the 99, go after the one. And so these European kings send help. It's called the what? The Crusades, right? So that's what the Crusades were. Now, a little bit